Welcome to the third video of Office 365 Beyond the Basics. In the first two videos, we covered the Office 365 universe and focused on SharePoint and OneDrive for Business and OneDrive Sync. In the second video, we looked at Skype for Business and Teams. In this last and third part, we're going to look at two exciting new Microsoft applications called PowerApps and Flow. What are PowerApps? Well, PowerApps are applications that users interact with on their desktop or mobile devices that take data from SharePoint or Power BI or 365 applications. In fact, can take anything that is lists of data and brings that data to your staff in the most convenient and time-saving way, particularly by using your mobile devices. It allows your staff to stay up to date with information, to keep that data accurate by accessing that data, those lists of materials that you may have hidden away in Excel lists or SharePoint lists or in other data applications, and brings it to the field, to your staff, to keep that data accurate and timely without the need of VPNs or remote access technologies. It doesn't rely on the traditional RDS server or terminal server in order to access the information. It brings the information directly from the Office 365 and Azure universe directly to the mobile device, tablet or phone, and allows the user to make changes while they're out and about. Flow allows us to expand the traditional automated workflows that typically are triggered within a single application across many different services by using connectors. Flows can be triggered to run when certain events occur, or services can be scheduled to run at specific times or triggered by the input of data. And users can interact with flows on their mobile devices by pressing virtual buttons to make them happen, all based on the Common Data Service for Applications, or CDS. Okay. Flows simplify your life. They can automate routine tasks. They save everyone a lot of time, increasing levels of performance and reliability. And very important, Flow allows for cross-application workflows and alerts, and allows non-developers to make changes in automated workflows easily and quickly. And that goes for PowerApps as well. We're not talking about deep programming development with heavy coding involved. This is very accessible technologies. PowerApps and Flow are part of the Business App Platform, which also includes Power BI. Now, you might be asking yourself, are you really saying that you could convert, say, an Excel sheet into an app that I could then access that information on the Excel sheet that's hidden in my OneNote, my OneDrive or SharePoint site from my phone, that I could update a SharePoint list or an Excel data list from anywhere that I have access to the internet, and that I can create flows and interactions between and processes that involve, Salesforce to SharePoint to Outlook without being a programmer? And the answer is yes. And let's take a look where that magic happens. So this may get a little geeky, but it's important to understand what Microsoft is doing to really appreciate the power that Microsoft is bringing to your fingertips. PowerApps, Microsoft Flow, and Power BI are all part of the Microsoft Power Platform. The Power Platform is supported by the Common Data Service for Apps. And that in turn is supported by definitions that have been created in the Common Data Model. Now this may get a little complicated, but stick with me for a few more slides and I think you'll appreciate the power of Microsoft's vision. Microsoft looked at enterprises and applications across the entire business spectrum, and they realized that there are certain common entities, files and contacts and clients and products, business concepts, invoicing, emails, all sorts of things that are common between all sorts of applications in all business verticals, okay? And realizing the need to be able to store and share and analyze data, what they did is they developed an open source definition of all of these entities called the Common Data Model to provide a well-defined structural standard entity directory, if you will, that most businesses could use to form a common language and definition across all of their applications. The Common Data Service is a place for all of the generated data and entities as defined in the model into a single repository so that organizations could engage with this data using standard tools like PowerApps, Flow, and Power BI, because they all conform to a standard data model definition, okay? So if you have defined definitions for all fundamental business activities and they're sort of preset, we know how each company has developed them, then it's easy for companies to develop connections or connectors to share their information across any number of data solutions. They work more efficiently because everyone is speaking the same language. They know how to access data that is stored in this common data model format. Because the data then can be stored in a common data service, it gives users the power to create their own customized applications and entities that conform to their proprietary functions and operations, but still stay within the common data model. So applications like PowerApps and Flow that use the Common Data Model and the Common Data Service can be used to easily design and develop programming without wasting time having to set up tables and databases, different views, and other complex original coding. A way to think about this is like Microsoft came up with Tinker Toys for building applications. It's kind of akin to what they did by programming inside of an Excel worksheet. Okay? Microsoft defines it as such. The Common Data Service is the Microsoft Azure-based business application platform that enables you to easily build and extend application with their data, with their business data. The Common Data Service does the heavy lifting of bringing together your data from across the Dynamics 365 family of services, which includes the Office 365 environment, so that you can focus on building and delivering apps, insights, and process automation that matter to you and your customers using PowerApps, Power BI, and Microsoft Flow. This is a mouthful, I understand, but it allows us to do very simple drag and drop programming to accomplish really remarkable access to our data. So let's take a look at easy application programming using PowerApps. PowerApps applications are simple, focused applications that users can interact with, whether they're on their desktop or web browser or from mobile devices. Here's an example of one. They can also access these PowerApp applications from within Microsoft Office products like SharePoint. PowerApp applications size to the device screen that you are targeting. So in this case, you can see it's set up in a mobile phone screen size. And it will size itself to whichever phone you happen to be loading the app to. Here's more of a tablet view. Now, often when you're developing PowerApp applications, you have multiple screens for editing your information. Perhaps one screen is an edit screen and the other screen is for input, or maybe one's a browse screen, one's a detail screen, and so on. But it's built so that you can build as many screens as you need in order to accomplish your desires. So where would you use PowerApps, and how can it work for you? Well, instead of having to worry about a company-wide application because development is so expensive, you could do smaller team or individual productivity applications. If an application only takes an hour or so to create, maybe you can then use it across just a few people. As we said before, you can use these applications in a Dynamics 365 world, but also involved with Office 365. If you buy apps from the Microsoft App Source, these apps will also be possible to interact with through PowerApps. And as we mentioned, you could use PowerApps in SharePoint or Outlook, Teams, Excel, and so on. You could even possibly interact with data from critical line of business applications as long as they've conformed to the common data model and have the connectors in place. And we'll see how that works. There are over 200 PowerApp connectors, okay? These connectors that allow PowerApps and flows to use API interfaces without any developer knowledge, okay? Because they're all built on the common data model. And all of this is automated behind the scenes. You don't have to be a programmer to do what programmers had done in the past with APIs. The APIs are kind of working behind the scenes, right? Here we see just an example of many of the 200 PowerApp connectors, and these are just a few of the A's. Now, if you really want to learn PowerApps, you can sign up for PowerApp workshops. And if you search for them on the web, you can find these seminars, Learn PowerApps in a Day. But we'll do a flyover and see how PowerApps can be built up in just a few minutes. Like any of the applications, like Word or Excel, PowerApps also comes with built-in templates. For instance, here are just a few for common PowerApp types that you might be able to search through and say, you know, what I'm trying to accomplish looks a lot like this help desk template or this budget tracker template. And so you can kind of use these templates as a starting point for building PowerApps. You can also start with your data. In other words, I know I want to interact with this list or this Excel sheet. So you can start and point your PowerApp application builder at the data and let it auto-create a template or a starting point. Here are just a few of the dozens of possible data sources. But you see, you could use data from within SharePoint or within your OneDrive for Business or even Salesforce or any number of a dozen different data sources. You could say, this is the list or this is the data that I'm interested in accessing on my mobile phone or in my device, in my PowerApp. Once you do that and say, okay, here is the list I would like to access, PowerApps goes ahead and creates a run at it, a trial, a model. Here is the 3-screen standard model that PowerApps creates after looking at a typical list. And typically, it involves a screen that you can browse the data with, then choose a particular record of, and even go into an edit screen where you can edit that record. Now, you may not want all of these. They may not be set up exactly right. You may need to add extra information and so on, but they basically give you a starting spot that allows you to make quick edits and get on your way quickly. How would you do that? Well, you take this app that has been created for you and you open it within the authoring or editing environment. PowerApps is an app that runs in a cloud. It's a cloud authoring app. And it's made up of various screens. This screen, or I should say zone, is for picking which screen and which details within that screen you would like to view and edit and modify and what have you. The second zone in your PowerApps editing console or view here is the screen or item viewer. As you can see, you can click on a field and it will illustrate or highlight where what the data is, where that data came from, what's the properties of that data, what size text, what color, etc. Once you click on a field like this, the field can be moved or adjusted right from this screen. So in this case, this field is called this week, this item.week, and it could be moved or modified, made bold, or show up on a different part of this particular screen. These two zones allow you to change the properties of that item or that you've picked and adjust what is displayed in that area. Once you move it to where you want on the screen, you can then say, you know, I really don't want the week field, but I want the day field, or I want the technician field, or I want the product, or whatever listing or field out of that record I want to look at. This area or zone allows you to check your code, if you will, or what you've done to see if it's legal. And it will tell you if you've made any mistakes and allow you to correct them and so on. You can undo, go back, go forward, just like any other edits you may have made. You can preview the app that will show you how it will look and run on the device itself. From that screen and that zone, you can also share out your app and say, I'm done and I would like to share this with this person, this group, or whomever you would like. In other words, you authorize through this screen whom you would like to share your finished Power App with. And under the question mark in the upper right-hand corner, you can help or learn more about creating Power Apps. There's a wonderful education that's available right from this screen. You might ask, well, then that's fine. You've shared out, you've created a Power App, which basically allows you to look at a list or a data. But how does it get on my phone? How does it get on my staff's phone? Well, PowerApps is an app that's available through the iTunes store or the App Store or on Google Play. And you download it and install it just like any other app you would for your mobile device. Then when you activate it or open it, it's going to ask you to sign into your Office 365 account. You can approve that app, that say, okay, this app I've now downloaded to my phone has permission to connect to your information source. Now the information is going to go back and forth encrypted so that you don't have to worry about that. And it's not going to allow you to see any data that you don't have permissions for in any other application. It simply connects your phone to that application. All right? Once you've done all of that, it will show which apps have been published and have been shared with you. So you would get a list of apps that are available as a user. because the author has shared them with you. And that's really all there is to it. Once you have that app on your phone, then opening that app and connecting to it will allow you to see the information and edit it, or whatever has been allowed through the app. There's also versioning control. So if you are making improvements to that app once you've published it, you can see which version is that you went live with and what version are you working on. If you publish a new version which doesn't work as well as the old, you can always revert back to earlier versions so that when it gets loaded to the final user, you're on the right version. Let's talk about Microsoft Flow. Workflows for everything. Well, that may be a little overstatement, but there is an awful lot you can do with Microsoft Flow, and we'll show you an example and run through one such example with you on how you might build a Microsoft Flow. But first, let's make sure we're all talking about the same thing. What is a workflow? How does Microsoft Flow relate to common workflows? Well, a workflow, and we all have them, even if we don't call them this, is either a process or a decision tree we go through in our business. It's kind of a defined flow of information from one point to the next. You could think of it as like an approval process or how we do business. Do this, and then if this is the case, then do that. If this is true, then do that, and so on. Most processes or workflows involve steps, discrete sections and decisions that have to be made. And often we are interacting with different data sources and reporting in order to make a decision. In other words, I get this from this person and I check it against this standard or what have you, and then I say yes or no, which moves it to the next step in the process. But a workflow typically involves steps. So, how does that relate to a Microsoft flow? Well, a Microsoft flow is also an automated process that follows a defined decision tree. And it interacts in steps through common data service systems. In other words, it involves, like in this case, starting in SharePoint, and is triggered when a new item is created that an approver steps in to check it out, look at the condition of what the approver sets in the next step, decide yes or no, and if yes, do X, and if Y, and if no, do Y. Okay, so it's an automated version of our processes, interacting with different information and different application lists, and waiting for decisions to be made at different steps or actions that are triggered by decisions. Very similar to kind of the mental flows that we go through normally. The power is all built, remember, on the common data service and the common data model, which allows us to take things from SharePoint into Outlook, from Salesforce, or wherever we have a connector. Speaking of connectors, again, there are hundreds of connectors by companies who want to be able for you to use their data. So whether it's a Microsoft product or Twitter or LinkedIn or MailChimp or whatever applications you might use in a day-to-day basis, it allows you to take things and information from these other 200 odd applications or companies and do things with it and manipulate the data. So what are some real-life business examples? Here are many of them. You might want to save an Outlook email attachments directly to OneDrive or get a weather report from Weather Service and automatically deliver it to your delivery driver. Maybe you want to create a workflow that says, notify me when I get an email from my boss, or start an approval process when somebody requests a time off. Maybe you want to synchronize your Outlook appointments to your Google Calendar, but have it happen all the time and behind the scenes and not even have you interact with it. Here are other examples like uploading files to SharePoint from PowerApps or approving tweets from specific hashtags or what have you. There's many, many real-life examples that perhaps you could think of that you do every day or every week, even at month's end, that it would be nice to have it do automatically. Well, just like in PowerApps or Excel or Word or what have you, there are dozens and dozens of templates that you can use. In fact, all of the earlier business examples were simply the titles of all of these flow templates. I just grabbed them and moved them and created a list of the flow templates that might be available to you. Using any one of these flow templates gives you a sense of how they're perhaps built, starting with an alarm clock or starting with something from Outlook or starting from a form or something. And then moving on, and your output is a alert, an alarm, something transferred to SharePoint, and so on. So these blocks give you a sense of how information starts and ends. And even though your information or the flow that you're creating might be different, using different information, but you can get a sense from these templates how to build your own. So you could start with a template like this one and edit it to your needs. Swap out different steps so that maybe it starts in SharePoint, but it goes to some other place. Or maybe it starts in Salesforce instead of starting in SharePoint. Now, you can also start a Microsoft Flow from scratch. In other words, if you have developed enough of a comfort or familiarity with all of the connectors and triggers and different features of Microsoft Flow, you can simply build one by dragging and dropping to your authoring environment different modules. Start with Outlook, go to SharePoint, do this and file this in OneNote, and so on. Get a tweet and do this. So you can drag and drop with triggers and actions. So let's build one. Here's an example of a flow that starts with a SharePoint list called the After Hours Phone Assignments. And what do I want to do? Well, starting in January, every Friday at 9 a.m. after that, I want to look at this list of our SharePoint After Hours Tech list, and I want to check for today's date, and I want to look a week ahead. So from today's date, I want to look 7 days ahead and find out who's going to be on call. And I want to send them an email giving them their start and end dates, sort of as a, hey, this is coming up, I want you to be aware of it. Sounds simple enough. What do I have to do? Well, starting at a certain time of the day every Friday sounds to me like it's a timed event, that it's triggered by something on a calendar. Well, there's a trigger called reoccurrence that's got a little clock that allows me to drag that in as my first trigger or my first action. And then what do I want to do next? Well, the next step is looking at something from SharePoint. So I drag and drop a SharePoint item right after the occurrence. And then what do I want to do? Well, for each item I get back, I want to send an email. So I drag an Outlook module in as another step. So there's basically a trigger and 2 actions. Let's take a closer look. Opening up the trigger, I see it's very easy. The questions they're asking me are no-brainers. It's asking me, how often do I want to do this? Well, once a week. And it asks me for my time zone, when I want to start. And it says on these days, on Fridays, at these hours at 9 o'clock. And it tells me its interpretation of what I've given it is this thing is going to run at 9 o'clock on Friday every week. That's exactly what I want. So I can move on and program the next action that starts when this is triggered. The next action is to go to my SharePoint site, find the list called After Hours Phone Assignments, and I want to look for the query, and there's all this gobbledygook, which we'll go into in more depth in a minute, and return a record. Okay, let's take a look at what that is. I'm not cheating, and it's not hard to do, because all of this data inside the filter query that I have a red square around, I've dragged and dropped from available expressions that were given to me. I did not have to know these off the top of my head. I got them from this list of dynamic content and expressions. I was looking for certain things like today's date and how to add 7 days to today's date and so on and so forth. And they were all here and available for me to drag and drop. And it gave me exactly what my format needed to look like. So I copied it over exactly how it wanted me to do it. And I didn't need to know very much. It did a lot of the work for me. But let's take a look inside this expression. It's really not that complicated once you break it down. Just take a breath and take each piece at a time. Well, that gobbledygook that starts at the beginning, start date equals the function of add days, UTC now, all that, it breaks down quite easily. All I'm asking for is look at my list and find the start date that's equal to 7 days from now, and find out any record that has a start date equal to now plus 7 days. All of these functions I dragged and dropped from the dynamic content and expression list that was to the right. If you can program an Excel data sheet, if you can create a macro, you can create this. It really isn't very difficult. So, getting back to what actually occurred here, all I did was look at today's date. Well, in this case, today's date was 1/11. All right. And then I asked it to find a date that was equal to 7 days from now. And then I wanted to return the record from this start date equal to 7 days from 1/11. Once it did that, I could identify the text name and then do something with all this information. Let me show you what I did. In the final step, after the step 2 returned the text name, the dynamic data showed me that in this step, I had all of these fields to the right available to me because PowerApps was smart enough to know that from that name, all this other data could be found. So I sent an email to the tech email name. Oh, and by the way, I sent myself a copy just to check. And I made the subject line, reminder of after hours phone or hours support for next week. And I built a body that had variables and some text that basically said, hey, tech display name, next week you're scheduled for after hours support beginning at this start date and this finish date. All of that stuff I dragged and dropped from my dynamic content that was being displayed at the same time. It really is not very difficult. So now I have a scheduled event in my active flows that sends an email to next week's tech every week, and I don't have to think about it ever again. And if the names get changed on the list, my flow still works because it looks at that updated list just as if it were the old list and follows the same flow. This concludes the final video in our 3-part series, Beyond the Basics, where we looked at OneDrive for Business and SharePoint Online. In the second video, we focused on Skype for Business and Teams. And this video, we looked at PowerApps and Flow. I hope you got a lot out of it and are encouraged to use these applications that are beyond the basics. There's a lot left in the periodic table of Office 365 that we haven't delved into. Some of these are extras, and you have to pay extra for it, such as Dynamics or Visio or Project Online. But many of these others are included in most Office 365 plans. Again, I'd like to thank you for viewing these videos. And if you have any further questions, please get a hold of the Application Services Group at River Run Computers. I'm Bob Marks, and my partner Renee Conner would be happy to sit down and have a conversation about using any and all of Office 365 applications. Thanks again.